In the summer of 1914, in the summer of 1914, the world stood on the edge of a new century, brimming with progress, invention, and pride. Europe was the center of it all, a continent of great powers and greater ambitions. But beneath the glitter of empires and the promises of peace, old rivalries were quietly tightening their grip. What began as a century of enlightenment was about to descend into 4 years of unimaginable darkness. To understand how the First World War began, we have to step back into the fragile balance that defined Europe in the early 1900s. The great empires, Britain, France, Russia, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, stood like giant chess pieces, each guarding its influence, each suspicious of the other. National pride was at an all-time high. The people of Europe were told their nations were strong, noble, and destined for greatness. But the alliances they built in pursuit of safety would become the very chains that dragged them into war. Germany, a rising power, had united only decades earlier and was eager to claim its place on the world stage. Britain, the mighty empire upon which the sun never set, ruled the seas and prided itself on naval dominance. France still carried the scars of its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War and longed for revenge. Russia, vast and unpredictable, sought to protect its Slavic brothers in the Balkans. And Austria-Hungary, an empire of many nations and few unifying ties, was struggling to hold itself together. All it needed was one spark. That spark came on June 28, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting Bosnia, a region simmering with nationalist tension. He came to show strength and unity, but to many Serbs his presence was an insult. Among them was a secret organization called the Black Hand, determined to see a free and independent Serbia. When Gavrilo Princip fired the shots that killed the Archduke and his wife, history itself changed course. The assassination was not merely an act of violence. It was the trigger to a chain reaction that no one could stop. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and demanded impossible concessions. Serbia, backed by Russia, refused to bow. Within weeks, the dominoes began to fall. Germany pledged support to Austria-Hungary. Russia mobilized to defend Serbia. France prepared to aid Russia. And Britain, though reluctant, was pulled in when Germany invaded neutral Belgium. By August 1914, Europe was at war. The people greeted it with cheers. Across capitals, crowds sang patriotic songs, waving flags and believing the fight would be over by Christmas. Young men rushed to enlist, excited by the promise of glory. They would return, they thought, as heroes. Few could imagine the horror that awaited them. The modern world had never seen a conflict like this. Armies that still believed in cavalry charges and bayonet fights soon met machine guns and artillery shells. The industrial age had changed everything. Technology, created to improve lives, was now being used to end them faster. The Western Front was born from that collision. In France and Belgium, soldiers dug deep trenches stretching hundreds of miles from the North Sea to the Swiss border. These ditches became their homes, muddy, rat-infested, cold, and deadly. Between the lines lay no man's land, a wasteland of barbed wire, craters, and corpses. Every inch of ground cost thousands of lives. Weeks turned into months, months into years. The early optimism faded quickly. Battles like the Marne, Ypres, and Verdun showed the true face of modern war: stalemate, suffering, and sacrifice. Men fought for yards, not miles. Victories were measured in blood, not land. While soldiers endured life in the trenches, families at home struggled with loss and rationing. Women took on new roles in factories and hospitals, keeping nations alive while their husbands, brothers, and sons fought abroad. The war reshaped societies as much as it did borders. Propaganda flooded the newspapers, portraying the enemy as evil and the cause as noble. Yet as the years dragged on, people began to question what they were really fighting for. Empires were crumbling, economies were collapsing, and hope was fading. In 1917, a new player entered the stage: the United States. Though it had tried to stay neutral, repeated German submarine attacks and the infamous Zimmermann telegram pushed America into the conflict. The arrival of fresh American troops tipped the balance, giving the weary Allies renewed strength. Meanwhile, in Russia, the war had unleashed revolution. The Tsar was overthrown, and a new communist government took power, withdrawing from the fight. The Eastern Front went quiet, but the West burned on. By 1918, both sides were exhausted. Millions were dead. Towns and villages were gone. And then, as if nature itself had joined the war, the Spanish flu struck, killing even more than the bullets and shells. Germany launched one final